The snow fell like ash from a dying world. Astrid drove her axe into the frozen wood, splitting it clean, her breath misting in the bitter air. Her homestead stood alone on the cliff's edge, overlooking the grey fjord where ice formed like broken glass along the shore. 3 winters had passed since she'd buried her brother Bjorn beneath the standing stones. 3 winters since she'd spoken his name aloud to another living soul. The wind carried a sound that didn't belong. The scrape of boots on frozen earth, uneven and desperate. She turned, hand moving instinctively to the sayax blade at her belt. Through the veil of snow, a figure stumbled toward her gate, dark against the white landscape. A man, she saw, bleeding from his side, his cloak torn and crusted with ice. He collapsed against her fence, and she saw his eyes, not the eyes of a raider or a thief, but eyes that had seen death and barely escaped its embrace. She should have turned him away. A woman alone had no business sheltering strangers, especially not men fleeing from something. But the storm was rising, and even her enemies did not deserve to freeze in the dark. Astrid crossed the snow-packed yard, hauled him to his feet with the strength of someone who'd learned to carry her own weight and more. He tried to speak, but she silenced him with a look. Inside her hall, the fire cast dancing shadows on timber walls. She laid him by the hearth, cut away his blood-soaked tunic to tend his wounds. The blade wound was deep but clean, a sword thrust that had missed the vital organs by the width of a prayer. As she worked, pressing moss and herbs into the gash, she noticed the ink marking his skin. Tattoos were common enough among warriors, symbols of raids and victories, gods and oaths, but this one made her hands stop. There, on his left shoulder, rendered in black and grey, the raven and the broken spear. The exact pattern, the exact style. The same mark her brother had carved into his own flesh the night before his final voyage, when he'd sworn his oath to the Jarl who would betray him. Her heart became stone in her chest. This stranger bore the symbol of the man who'd sent Bjorn to his death. Before we continue this journey, subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Your strength keeps these legends alive. The stranger slept through that first night while the storm raged outside, shaking the walls, piling snow against the door. Astrid sat across from him, her axe across her knees, watching the rise and fall of his chest. She could kill him now. One strike would do it. Payment for her brother's blood, delivered by fate to her very doorstep. But she was not her father's daughter for nothing. She would know why before she acted. She would hear his story before she delivered her judgment. When dawn came grey and cold, he woke. His eyes found her immediately, taking in her position, her weapon, her unwavering gaze. He tried to sit up and gasped at the pain. She let him struggle for a moment before speaking. "You carry a mark I've seen only once before," she said, her voice flat as winter stone. "Tell me how you came by it, and tell me true. My patience for lies died 3 winters past." The stranger's face was weathered, carved by wind and hardship, but younger than she'd first thought. Perhaps 30 summers, perhaps fewer. His dark hair fell across eyes the color of deep water. When he spoke, his voice was rough with disuse and pain. "I was sworn to Jarl Eriksson," he said, each word careful. "I bore his mark and fought under his banner for 5 years, until I learned what kind of man he truly was." Astrid's grip tightened on her axe handle. "And what kind of man is that? The kind who sends good warriors to die for his ambition while he grows fat on their sacrifice. The kind who breaks guest right and sacred oaths when gold calls. Louder than honor." She stood then, towering over him. "My brother died on Eriksson's orders, died believing he served an honorable lord, died with that mark on his skin and lies in his ears." The stranger's expression shifted, not surprise, but recognition. "Bjorn Thorvaldsson," he said quietly. "He was your brother." The world narrowed to a point. "You knew him. I fought beside him. The night he died, I was supposed to die with him. Eriksson sent 12 of us to raid a rival settlement, told us it would be undefended. It was a trap, an ambush. Only 3 of us made it back, and when we did, Eriksson acted surprised, called it misfortune." He met her eyes. "But I found the messenger's payment later, hidden in his hall. He'd sold us, sold his own sworn men for peace with his enemy. Astrid felt something crack inside her chest, the frozen grief of 3 years beginning to thaw into rage. Why did you run? Because I confronted him. Because when I demanded answers, he ordered me seized and executed for treason. I killed 2 of his guards escaping, and now his hunters track me across the mountains. He gestured to his wound. They nearly caught me yesterday. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the wind had died, leaving the world wrapped in terrible silence. Astrid turned away, staring into the flames, seeing her brother's face in the dancing light. Bjorn, who had trusted too easily, who had believed in honor even when honor had become a merchant's currency. She let him live, not from mercy, but from a deeper calculation. This stranger, his name was Halvard, she learned, knew things she needed to know. Ericsson's holdings, his guard rotations, his weaknesses. If vengeance was to be had, it would require more than blind rage. It would require planning. The days that followed formed a strange rhythm. She tended his wounds, and he healed with the resilience of a man accustomed to injury. They spoke little at first, circling each other like wolves, unsure of territory. But necessity bred familiarity. He helped where he could, mending her fence with one good arm, checking her traps, splitting wood when his strength returned. In the evenings they sat by the fire, and slowly, in fragments, the truth emerged. Halvard had been a fisherman's son from the outer islands, orphaned young, taken in by Ericsson's household to train as a warrior. He'd believed in service, in loyalty, in the old ways where a man's word was iron and oaths were sacred. Discovering his lord's treachery had shattered something fundamental in him. I was nothing before Ericsson, he admitted one night, staring into the flames. He gave me purpose, taught me to fight, made me part of something larger. When I learned the truth, it was like waking to find the world was painted cardboard, hollow behind the facade. Astrid understood that feeling. She'd built her life here, alone on this cliff, because she could no longer bear the world of jarls and warriors, the endless cycle of ambition and betrayal. Better to live apart, to survive by her own strength, to need nothing from anyone. My brother believed to the end, she said. Even when the ambush closed around them, even as he died, he probably thought it was just misfortune, just the way of things. The bitterness in her voice could have etched stone. I'd rather he'd known. I'd rather he'd died angry than died trusting. Perhaps anger is its own kind of prison, Halvard said quietly. She turned on him, eyes blazing. And what would you have me feel instead? Forgiveness? Acceptance? No, he said, meeting her gaze, without flinching. I'd have you feel what you feel, but I'd also have you recognize that Ericsson stole enough from you already. Don't let him steal the rest of your life by letting him occupy every thought. It was bold, speaking to her this way, but she found she didn't hate it. Found, in fact, that his presence, his understanding, was the first warmth she'd felt in 3 years that didn't come from fire. Winter deepened its grip. Snow piled high around the homestead, transforming the world into white silence, broken only by wind and the distant crack of ice. They were trapped here now until spring. The mountain passes sealed, the fjord frozen solid. Astrid had provisions enough for 1, stretched thin for 2, but they managed. She was a skilled hunter, and Halvard proved useful with net and line, breaking through the ice to catch fish in the dark water below. They fell into partnership without naming it. He learned her routines. She learned his. They moved around each other in the small hall with the unconscious coordination of people who'd shared space for years rather than weeks. Sometimes she caught herself about to speak to him the way she'd once spoken to Bjorn, easy, unguarded, and had to remember he was not her brother, not her family, just a stranger fate had deposited at her door. But on the long nights, stories emerged like smoke. He told her of his childhood on the islands, of learning to read the sea, of his mother who died of fever when he was 8. She told him of growing up in her father's house, of learning the spear and shield alongside her brother because their father had believed daughters should be able to defend themselves, of the day Bjorn left for Eriksson's hall, promising to send for her when he'd made his fortune, to bring her to a better place. "He never did," she said. "And then he was dead, and I learned there was no better place, just the same betrayals wearing different colors." One night, a sound woke her, Halvard crying out in his sleep, caught in some nightmare. She rose from her bed, went to where he thrashed near the fire. She shook him awake and he gasped, disoriented, his hand catching her wrist before recognition flooded his eyes. "Sorry," he breathed. "I'm sorry. What did you see?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Bjorn," he finally said. "The night of the ambush. He saved my life. Did you know that? Threw himself between me and a spear meant for my chest, took the blow himself. I dragged him behind a stone wall, tried to stop the bleeding, but there were too many of them. He told me to run, to get word back to Eriksson. He died thinking I'd deliver his message, that his death would mean something." Halvard's voice broke. "I carried his body 3 miles before I had to leave him. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't bring him home." Astrid felt tears on her face before she realized she was crying. 3 years, and she'd never known how her brother died, never known if he'd suffered, if he'd been afraid. Now this stranger gave her what she'd ached for, the knowledge that Bjorn hadn't died alone, that someone had tried to save him, that his last moments had held some measure of companionship in the dark. She didn't plan what happened next. One moment she was crying, and the next she was holding Halvard. And he was holding her, and they were both grieving the same ghost, the same loss, the same betrayal. In that moment, the wall between them crumbled entirely. Spring arrived not all at once, but in whispers. The ice on the fjord began to crack and sing. Birds returned to the cliffs, their cries breaking the winter silence. The snow retreated up the mountains, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of green. The world, it seemed, could not stay frozen forever. Neither could they. The partnership had evolved into something neither of them named, but both recognized. They worked together, rebuilding her fence, strengthening the walls, preparing the soil for planting. His wound had healed to a puckered scar, and his strength had returned. He could leave now, if he chose, take his chances on the mountain passes, disappear into the wider world, where Eriksson's reach might not extend. He didn't leave, and she didn't ask him to. The truth settled between them like spring light, soft and undeniable. Whatever they were building here, it was more than temporary shelter. One evening, as they worked to repair the roof thatch, she finally voiced the question that had haunted her through the winter. What happens when the pass is open completely, when Eriksson's men can hunt you again? Halvard drove in another peg, testing its strength before answering. "I've been thinking about that. Eriksson won't stop. He can't afford to let me live. I know too much, and if word spreads about what he did, his power crumbles. He'll send more hunters." "Then we need to finish this," Astrid said. "We need to face him." He looked at her sharply. "We? Did you think I'd let you walk away with my vengeance in your pocket?" She smiled, but there was iron in it. "My brother's death is my business, and if Eriksson needs answering for it, I'll be there when the accounting comes. It would be dangerous, likely fatal. Everything worth doing is." She climbed down from the roof, wiped her hands on her tunic. "Besides, I've been alone long enough. If I'm going to die for something, better it's for justice than from isolation." He followed her down, and they stood in the muddy yard as the sun set over the fjord, painting everything gold and crimson. "You don't have to do this for me," he said quietly. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Bjorn. For myself, for every person Eriksson will betray in the future if someone doesn't stop him." She met his eyes. "But I'm also not doing it alone. We're stronger together. We've proven that through the winter." Something passed between them then, an understanding, an acknowledgement of what they'd become to each other. Not quite lovers, not quite friends, something deeper and less easily defined. Allies bound by shared loss and shared purpose, yes, but also by the slow recognition that two solitary souls had found unexpected completion in each other's company. "Then we plan," Halvard said, "and when we're ready, we strike." Astrid nodded. The path ahead was clear now, for the first time in 3 years. Not back to the past, not deeper into isolation, but forward. Into danger, yes, but also into purpose. The frozen grief that had held her motionless was melting at last, transforming into something active and alive. Justice, and perhaps, when it was done, something even more precious, peace. They spent weeks preparing. Halvard drew maps in the dirt by firelight, sketching the layout of Ericsson's hall, the positions of guards, the rhythms of the household. Astrid practiced with her weapons until her muscles burned, remembering skills she'd let grow rusty in her solitude. They were 2 against a Jarl's full household, impossible odds by any calculation. But then, the impossible had a way of yielding to those desperate enough to achieve it. The plan was forming when the messenger arrived. Astrid saw him from a distance, a lone rider coming up the coastal path, his horse labouring through the spring mud. She alerted Halvard, and they watched from the tree line, hands on weapons, as he approached. The rider was young, barely old enough to grow a proper beard. He wore Ericsson's colours, and Astrid's hand tightened on her axe, but the boy called out before reaching the gate, his voice high and nervous. "I seek Halvard the Oathbreaker. I carry a message from Jarl Ericsson." Halvard emerged from the trees, and the boy's eyes went wide. "You're alive," he breathed, disappointed. Halvard's voice was flat. "No, I mean—" The boy dismounted, fumbling with a sealed letter. "The Jarl sent me to deliver this. He said if I found you alive, I was to wait for your response." Halvard took the letter, broke the seal, read in silence. Astrid watched his face, harden with each line. When he finished, he looked up at the messenger. "Tell Ericsson his terms are accepted. 3 days from now, at the place he names, I'll come alone." The boy nodded, clearly relieved to have survived the encounter, and rode off with more speed than he'd arrived. When he was gone, Astrid snatched the letter from Halvard's hand. The words were simple, elegant in their cruelty. Ericsson knew where Halvard had wintered, knew about Astrid, offered a trade, Halvard's life for her safety. Come alone, submit to execution, and the Shieldmaiden would be left untouched. Refuse, and Ericsson would send 40 warriors to burn her homestead to ash with her inside it. "You're not actually considering this," Astrid said, her voice dangerous. "Of course not, but now we know he's afraid enough to negotiate, which means afraid enough to make mistakes. As fate turns against our hero, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's see how far these voices can travel." She lowered the letter, understanding dawning. He's weakened. Something's happened. Word must have spread about the ambush. Not enough to destroy him, but enough to make him vulnerable. He needs to tie off loose ends before his rivals exploit the rumors. Halvard's smile was grim. "He thinks I'm alone, desperate, maybe grateful for the chance to save you by sacrificing myself. Instead, we use his assumptions against him. He wants to draw me out, but what he'll get is something else entirely." They spent the next 3 days refining their approach. The meeting place Ericsson had chosen was a clearing in the forest, 2 hours' ride from his hall, far enough to be private, close enough for him to reach with a small escort. He'd expect Halvard to come alone, defeated, ready for execution. He wouldn't expect a trap of his own. On the morning of the 3rd day, they rode out together. Astrid had braided her hair for war, painted her face with ash and ochre in the old style. She carried her brother's shield, the one she'd kept these 3 years, its surface marked, with his personal symbols. Halvard rode beside her, armed but appearing unarmed, his weapons concealed beneath his cloak. The forest swallowed them, ancient pines rising like pillars of some vast cathedral. Sunlight filtered through in shafts of gold, illuminating the path. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say that they hadn't already communicated in the silent language of the winter they'd shared. When they reached the clearing's edge, they dismounted, moved forward on foot, and there, in the center of the clearing, waited Ericsson. Jarl Ericsson was not what Astrid had imagined. She'd built him in her mind as a monster, but the man who stood in the clearing was distressingly ordinary, middle-aged, running to fat, richly dressed, but without ostentation. His beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes calculating but not cruel. He looked like a merchant, a politician, which, she supposed, was exactly what he was. A man who traded in lives the way others traded in silver and grain. He'd brought 6 warriors with him, all armed, all watching the tree line with the wariness of men who knew they might be walking into danger. When Halvard stepped into the clearing, they tensed, hands moving to sword hilts. When Astrid followed him out, Ericsson's expression shifted, surprise, then anger, then something like resignation. "I should have known you wouldn't come alone," the Jarl said. "You always were too clever for simple obedience." "Strange words from a man who traffics in betrayal," Halvard replied. Eriksson spread his hands, the picture of reasonableness. "I offer you a clean death, Halvard, and I offer the woman her life and her home, untouched. This doesn't have to be complicated." "You killed my brother," Astrid said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "You sent him to die for your profit. That's fairly complicated from where I stand." The Jarl's eyes flicked to her, assessing. "Bjorn Thorvaldsson, yes, a good warrior. His death was unfortunate, but he died in service to his lord. There's honor in that. There's no honor in betrayal disguised as duty." She took a step forward, and Ericsson's guards shifted. "You sold your own men, traded their lives for peace with your enemies. What kind of lord does that? The kind who survives." Ericsson's voice hardened. "You think this world runs on honor, on sacred oaths and noble sacrifice? Those are stories we tell children to make them behave. The truth is simpler. Power goes to those willing to pay its price. Your brother paid with his life. Halvard will pay with his. And you," he smiled, and it was the smile of a serpent, "you'll pay with your witness. You'll go back to your lonely homestead. And remember that defying me has consequences." "No," Halvard said simply. "We're done paying your prices." Things happened fast then. Halvard threw back his cloak, revealing the short spear he'd carried hidden. He launched it not at Eriksson, but at the nearest guard, taking the man through the throat before anyone could react. Astrid was already moving, her axe singing as it came free, her brother's shield raised before her. The clearing erupted into chaos. Ericsson's guards converged, but they'd been expecting an execution, not a fight, and that moment of hesitation cost them. Astrid took the first man with her axe, the blade biting deep into his shoulder, spinning him away, screaming. Halvard had his sword now, engaging 2 others, his movements economical and deadly. They'd planned for this, fighting together, covering each other, using the terrain. The clearing's edge gave them some protection, limiting the angles of attack. But they were still outnumbered 3 to 1, and these were professional warriors, men who fought for their living. Astrid felt the bite of a blade across her arm, shallow but painful. She reversed her grip, drove her axe's spike into her attacker's knee, brought him down. Halvard was bleeding from a cut above his eye, but he fought on, his sword weaving patterns of defense and counterattack. And then, through the press of combat, Astrid saw Eriksson. The Jarl had drawn his own sword, but stayed back, letting his men do the work. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not fear, but cold calculation. He was already planning his next move, already thinking of how to survive this, how to spin it to his advantage. She thought of Bjorn, of his last moments, dying on foreign ground for a lie, of 3 years of grief, frozen into anger, into this moment. She broke from the fight, charging directly at Eriksson. Her brother's shield held before her like a battering ram. The Jarl tried to sidestep, but she was faster, driven by fury and purpose. Her shoulder hit him square in the chest, driving him backward, and they went down together in a tangle of limbs. His sword flew from his hand. She pinned him, her axe at his throat, breathing hard. "Wait," he gasped. "Wait, I can pay you. Gold, land, whatever you want." "I want my brother back," she snarled. "Can you give me that?" Silence. except for the sounds of fighting behind her, the wet sounds of steel finding flesh. Ericsson's eyes darted past her, looking for rescue, but his remaining guards were occupied, and the tide of battle had turned against them. "You're going to die here," Astrid said quietly. "But before you do, I want you to understand something. You thought you could trade in lives without consequence. You thought power made you untouchable, but every death you caused, every oath you broke, they all led to this moment, to you, on your back in the dirt, about to reap what you've sown. Please," he whispered, and there was finally fear in his eyes. "Please, She never heard what he was going to say. Halvard's sword took him through the heart from behind, the point erupting through his chest an inch from Astrid's face. The Jarl's eyes went wide, then empty, then still. The clearing fell silent. The last of Ericsson's guards lay dead or dying, and the only sounds were ragged breathing and the whisper of wind through the pines. Astrid rolled off the Jarl's corpse, her hands shaking with spent adrenaline. Blood soaked the earth, turned the new grass dark. She'd imagined this moment countless times, but the reality was messier, emptier than her fantasies. Halvard extended his hand, helped her to her feet. They stood together, surveying the carnage. 7 men dead, including their lord. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the end of something, but not the beginning of anything better. "We need to leave," Halvard said, wiping his blade clean. "When Ericsson doesn't return, they'll come looking. We don't want to be here when they arrive." "Where do we go?" The question felt larger than just geography. Anywhere but here. He looked at her, and his eyes were exhausted. The eyes of someone who'd carried a weight too long. "We've done what we came to do. Ericsson's dead. The debt is paid. But that doesn't mean we're safe. His household will want revenge. His rivals will try to claim his holdings. There'll be a scramble for power, and we're liabilities. Witnesses to his crimes, killers of a Jarl." Astrid understood. They'd crossed a line here, one that couldn't be uncrossed. In killing Ericsson, they'd become outlaws themselves, regardless of the justice of their cause. The law didn't care about murdered brothers or betrayed oaths. The law cared about dead Jarls and disrupted hierarchies. They gathered their weapons, checked their wounds. Nothing fatal, but both were cut and bruised, marked by the fight. They'd need to treat the injuries soon, before infection set in. They walked back to where they'd left their horses, mounted, and rode away from the clearing without looking back. The journey back to the homestead took twice as long as the journey out. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Astrid kept seeing Ericsson's face at the moment of death, not triumphant, not vindicated, just empty. She'd thought vengeance would feel like completion, like a circle closing. Instead, it felt like reaching the end of a path and realizing there was only wilderness beyond. When they finally reached the cliff and saw the homestead, it looked different, smaller somehow. The place she'd built her solitary life, her fortress against the world, now seemed like exactly what it was, a stopping point, not a destination. She'd hidden here, she realized, not from enemies but from living, from the risk of connection, of purpose, of all the ways the world could hurt you when you let it in. Halvard dismounted, started seeing to the horses. Astrid stood in the yard, looking out over the fjord. The ice was gone now, the water open and flowing, reflecting the evening sky. Ships could sail here again, paths opened where before there'd been only frozen barriers. "What are you thinking?" Halvard asked, coming to stand beside her. "That I can't stay here anymore," she said. "Ericsson's people will come eventually, and even if they don't, I can't go back to what this place was, to who I was before." "And who were you before?" She considered the question. Frozen, waiting for something without knowing what, using grief as an excuse not to move forward. She turned to face him. "Thank you for that. For giving me a reason to thaw." His expression was complicated, gratitude and sorrow mixed together. "I think we gave that to each other." They spent one more night in the homestead, tending their wounds, gathering supplies, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Astrid packed light, weapons, some food, her brother's shield. The rest she left for whoever found it. Let them have the house, the land, the lonely life she'd built here. She was done with it. In the morning they rode south, following the coast toward the settlement lands where law was looser and questions were fewer. Behind them, smoke rose from the homestead's chimney. Astrid had left the fire burning, a beacon or a farewell, she wasn't sure which. They traveled for weeks, keeping to the wilderness, avoiding the established roads where word of Ericsson's death might have spread. Spring deepened into early summer, and the land transformed around them. Mountains giving way to rolling hills, dense forests to open meadows dotted with wildflowers. They moved like ghosts through someone else's world, belonging nowhere, bound to nothing. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The constant movement, the shared danger, the nightly camps under open sky, it forged them into something new. They weren't just survivors anymore, weren't just allies bound by revenge. They were becoming their own entity, a partnership that didn't need names or definitions. They took work where they could find it, helping a farmer rebuild his barn in exchange for food and shelter, hunting bandits for a nervous merchant, once even guarding a wedding caravan through dangerous territory. Small jobs, anonymous work, but honest. They were careful never to stay long enough to attract attention, never to leave traces that could be followed back to them. One evening, they made camp by a river, the water running silver and cold from mountain snowmelt. Halvard caught fish while Astrid built the fire, and they cooked their meal in companionable silence. The sun set in shades of amber and rose, painting the clouds like a promise. "Do you regret it?" Halvard asked suddenly. "Killing Ericsson, leaving your home, all of it?" Astrid thought about the question, really considered it. "No," she said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my brother died for a lie and that justice required blood. But I don't regret choosing to act rather than staying frozen. And I don't regret," she gestured between them, "this, whatever this is. Partnership," he offered. "More than that." She met his eyes across the fire. "You're the first person in 3 years who reminded me I was still alive. Not just surviving, but alive. Capable of feeling things other than grief." He was quiet for a moment. "I was lost before I stumbled to your door. Outlawed, wounded, purposeless. You gave me something to fight for that was larger than just staying alive one more day. So we saved each other. I suppose we did." The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the darkening sky. Somewhere downstream, a nightbird called, its song lonely and beautiful. Astrid felt the old familiar ache for her brother, but it had changed. It was no longer the sharp, frozen pain of unresolved loss. It was softer now, more like an old scar, something that would always be part of her, but no longer defined her entirely. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "We can't run forever." "No," Halvard agreed. "But we don't have to. Word will spread about Ericsson's death, but not about who killed him. We were careful. Eventually, the search will die down, and we'll just be 2 more wanderers in a world full of them. We can find a place, build something new, together. Together." The word resonated with possibility. Astrid had spent 3 years alone, convinced that isolation was safety, that needing no one meant never being hurt again. But Halvard had shown her the flaw in that logic. Safety without connection wasn't life. It was just a slower form of death. "I'd like that," she said simply. They sat in silence as night fell completely, the stars emerging overhead in their ancient patterns. Tomorrow they'd move on, keeping ahead of any pursuit, looking for the right place to make their stand. But tonight they had this: fire and companionship, the simple comfort of not being alone. For the first time since Bjorn's death, Astrid felt something like hope. Not the naive hope of someone who'd never been hurt, but the harder, more valuable hope of someone who'd survived hurt and chosen to keep living anyway. The road ahead was uncertain, possibly dangerous, but she'd walk it with someone she trusted at her side. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 2 months after Ericsson's death, they found a place that felt right, a small settlement at the crossroads of 3 trading routes, large enough for anonymity, but small enough to notice newcomers. The people here were pragmatic, more interested in what you could do than who you'd been, perfect for those seeking to disappear into new lives. They presented themselves as siblings, traveling south after the death of their father, close enough to the truth to be believable, simple enough not to attract questions. Halvard found work with the settlement's blacksmith, his strength and reliability quickly making him indispensable. Astrid took on guard work, protecting merchant caravans through the surrounding forests, her skill with blade and bow earning respect. They rented a small house at the settlement's edge. Nothing fancy, just 2 rooms and a hearth, but it was theirs. Slowly, carefully, they built a life. Not the life either had imagined, but something new, something earned through fire and loss and hard choices. Word of Ericsson's death reached them eventually, carried by traveling merchants and wandering skalds. The story had transformed in the telling. Some said he'd been killed by a rival Jarl's assassins. Others claimed he died in a hunting accident. Still others whispered about a curse from the gods for his oath-breaking. No version mentioned a Shieldmaiden and a fugitive warrior. Their names had been swallowed by rumor and speculation, which was exactly how they wanted it. But the past had a way of finding those who ran from it. One autumn afternoon, Astrid returned from a caravan run to find Halvard waiting outside their house, his face grave. A man sat on their doorstep, old, weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. She recognized him immediately. Thorstein, her father's oldest friend, a warrior who'd fought alongside Bjorn. "Astrid Thorvaldsdottir," he said, rising to his feet. "I've been searching for you for 3 months." Her hand moved to her weapon, but Thorstein raised his palm in peace. "I'm not here for revenge or justice. I'm here because you deserve to know the truth, all of it. All of..." They brought him inside, gave him ale and bread, waited while he gathered his words. When he spoke, it was like stones dropping into still water, rippling outward with terrible implications. "Ericsson didn't just betray Bjorn," Thorstein said. "He betrayed all of us, the entire old guard of warriors who'd served his father. We were a threat to him, you see. Too loyal to the old ways, too likely to question his new methods. The ambush that killed your brother was meant to eliminate everyone who remembered when honor meant something." Astrid felt something cold settle in her stomach. How many? How? 12 good warriors sent to die that night. 3 survived the initial trap, Halvard, Bjorn, and a man named Olaf. Bjorn died helping Halvard escape. Olaf made it back to the hall, but was poisoned before he could spread word of the betrayal. Thorstein's eyes were haunted. "I survived because I was too old to send on raids anymore, but I watched what Ericsson became, and I knew eventually someone would make him answer for it. We killed him," Halvard said quietly, "in the forest clearing. It's done." Thorstein nodded slowly. "I know. Word reached me. But what you don't know is what came after. Ericsson's death created a power vacuum. His holdings were seized by 3 different rivals, each claiming legitimacy. In the chaos, his hall burned. His family fled. His name is now used as a cautionary tale about the price of betrayal." He looked between them. "You two did what the gods themselves couldn't manage. You brought justice to a man who thought himself untouchable." "It doesn't feel like justice," Astrid said. "It just feels like more death." "Because justice rarely feels the way we imagine it will," Thorstein replied. "It's not satisfaction or peace. It's just the balancing of scales, and scales have no emotion." He reached into his pack, pulled out something wrapped in oiled cloth. "But closure, that's different. That's personal, and you deserve that at least." He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a sword. Astrid's breath caught. She recognized it immediately. Her brother's blade, the one he'd carried to his death, the one she thought lost forever. "I found it in Ericsson's trophy hall," Thorstein said. "He kept the weapons of the men he killed, wore their deaths like honors. This belongs to you now, not for revenge. That's already taken, but for remembrance." Astrid took the sword with trembling hands. The leather grip was worn where Bjorn's hand had held it, the blade nicked and scarred from battles she'd never witnessed. Holding it was like holding a piece of her brother himself, a tangible connection to the man he'd been. "Thank you," she whispered. Thorstein stood to leave. "I won't tell anyone where you are or who you've become. As far as the world's concerned, you're ghosts. And that's probably safest. But I wanted you to know that Bjorn's death wasn't forgotten, that his name is still spoken with respect by those who knew him, and that you honored his memory in the way that mattered most, by refusing to let his killer escape consequences." After he left, Astrid and Halvard sat in silence, the sword laid between them like a bridge between past and present. She traced the runes carved into the blade, Bjorn's personal marks, symbols of courage and loyalty. "I thought killing Eriksson would be the end," she said finally, "the conclusion of the story. But it's not, is it? It's just another chapter. The story keeps going as long as we're alive to live it." "And what story do you want to tell?" Halvard asked. She looked at him, this man who'd stumbled into her life as a stranger, who'd become her partner, her purpose, maybe something even deeper than that. "One where we don't just survive," she said, "where we actually live, where Bjorn's death wasn't meaningless because it led to something good, to us, to this." He reached across the space between them, took her hand. "Then that's the story we'll tell." Outside, the settlement bustled with evening activity. Merchants closing their shops, children running home for supper, the smith's hammer ringing one last time before night fell. Ordinary life, the kind that seemed impossible 3 years ago when Astrid was frozen in grief on her lonely cliff. But here it was, happening all around her, inviting her to be part of it. She hung Bjorn's sword above their hearth, not hidden away but displayed, a reminder of what had been lost, but also what had been gained. Every time she looked at it, she'd remember her brother, yes, but she'd also remember that love and loss weren't the end of the story. They were just part of the great weaving, the pattern that made life both beautiful and terrible, and worth living despite everything. Years passed, the settlement grew, and with it, their place within it. Halvard became the blacksmith's partner, then eventually took over the forge when the old man retired. Astrid's reputation as a skilled caravan guard spread, and soon she was leading expeditions, training younger fighters, becoming a person others looked to for protection and guidance. They married in the spring, 5 years after Eriksson's death, in a simple ceremony witnessed by the settlement folk who'd become their community. No jarls, no grand halls, no political alliances, just two people choosing each other after already having been through everything that mattered. Astrid wore flowers in her hair and carried Bjorn's sword. Halvard spoke his vows with the same quiet certainty he brought to everything. It was perfect because it was real. They had children, 2 daughters and a son. Astrid taught them to fight, to think, to question authority that demanded blind obedience. Halvard taught them to create, to value honest work, to understand that strength came in many forms. They told the children stories about their uncle Bjorn, keeping his memory alive not as a tragedy, but as a life worth remembering. A man who'd loved deeply and died, honorably, even if he'd been betrayed. Sometimes in the quiet moments, Astrid wondered what her brother would think of the life she'd built. Would he approve? Would he understand why she'd done what she'd done? She liked to think he would. Liked to imagine him somewhere beyond the veil, watching, with that crooked smile he'd always worn, proud of her for choosing to keep living after his death rather than letting grief consume her. The world continued its turning. Jarls rose and fell, wars were fought and ended, the cycle of ambition and power rolled on as it always had. But in their small corner of it, Astrid and Halvard had carved out something different. Not perfect, not without struggle, but genuine. They'd taken the broken pieces of their lives and forged them into something new, something that honored the past while refusing to be imprisoned by it. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep and the settlement was quiet under snow, they'd sit by their fire, the same way they'd once sat by her lonely hearth on the cliff, 2 damaged souls finding unexpected salvation in each other. They didn't talk much during these times. They didn't need to. The silence between them was comfortable, full of shared history and mutual understanding. Astrid would sometimes take down Bjorn's sword, oil and sharpen it, keep it maintained, even though she'd never use it in battle. It was a ritual, a remembrance, a way of saying that the past mattered even as she lived in the present. Halvard would watch her work, understanding without needing explanation, because he carried his own ghosts, his own memories of the men who died alongside Bjorn that terrible night. "Do you think we did right?" she asked him once, years into their marriage, during one of these quiet evenings. Killing Eriksson, running, building this life. Do you think it was justice or just revenge with a prettier name? Halvard considered, his face thoughtful in the firelight. I think it was both, and I think that's okay. The world isn't as simple as the songs make it. Justice and revenge, honor and survival. They're all tangled together, and sometimes you do what you must and live with the complexity of it afterward. And do you live with it? She pressed. Do you have regrets? Every day, he admitted. But I also have this, us, our children, this life we built from ashes. If I could go back and change things, save Bjorn, prevent all that suffering, I would. But I can't. All I can do is make sure that his death and the deaths of all those good warriors led to something better than just more death. He met her eyes. You are my something better, Astrid. This family, this peace. It's not redemption. I don't think I'm owed that, but it's meaning. And maybe that's enough. She reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. It's more than enough, she said. It's everything. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the settlement in white silence. Inside, the fire burned warm, and two people who'd found each other in darkness sat together in the light they'd created. The past would always be with them. Bjorn's sword above the mantle, the scars on their bodies, the memories that surfaced in dreams. But the past was just one part of their story now, not the whole of it. They'd started as strangers, a lonely Shieldmaiden and a fugitive warrior, bound by shared loss and the mark of betrayal. They'd walked through vengeance and come out the other side, not unscathed, but alive, not unchanged, but stronger for the changing. They'd learned that justice was complicated, that closure was a process, not an event, that love could grow even in the scorched earth of trauma. And in learning these things, they'd found what so many spend their whole lives seeking: a place to belong, a person to trust, a reason to believe that even after the worst has happened, there can still be peace. If this journey moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share in the comments what touched you the most. Your voice keeps these legends alive. The fire crackled. The children slept safely in their beds, and Astrid Thorvaldsdottir, once frozen by grief, now warm with life and love and purpose, smiled at her husband and knew, truly knew, that some stories do have happy endings after all. Not perfect endings, not easy endings, but real ones, earned through fire and pain, and the stubborn choice to keep going, even when the path ahead was dark. And those, she had learned, were the only endings worth having.